The sound that broke the morning wasn't a shout, but the low, guttural grumble of a diesel engine idling. It was a sound of industry, of purpose, vibrating through the floorboards of our quiet Memphis home, a sound that didn't belong on our sleepy residential street. I stood in the living room, holding a clipboard. The plastic was cool and smooth against my palm. On the other side of the wall, in the kitchen, I could hear Leon laughing. It was a full, easy sound, the kind of laugh he used on the phone with his friends, untroubled and expansive. He was probably watching some ridiculous video someone had sent him, his coffee growing cold on the counter beside him, oblivious. He had no idea that the sound vibrating up through his feet was the sound of the end. He had no idea that my world, the world that had held him for 12 years, had already tilted on its axis, and he was just moments from sliding off. The air in the house was thick with the scent of yesterday's dinner and the coming rain, but for me, all I could smell was the clean, sharp scent of the inventory labels I'd spent 3 nights applying in secret. Each little white rectangle with its bold black number was a period at the end of a sentence I was no longer willing to write. The truck outside wasn't just a truck. It was the answer to a question he had laughed at a month ago, and in the silence of my own heart, I was finally ready to give it. My name is Rochelle. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 10 of those years, I've been the owner of Curl and Thrive, a salon just off South Main that I built from the ground up. Leon was 39. We had been married for 12 years. 12 years is long enough to build a life, an empire, or a prison, and sometimes you don't know which one you've made until you try to leave it. In my line of work, you learn about dead ends. You see them in brittle, over-processed strands that snap with the slightest pressure. You learn that health requires maintenance, that growth requires care, and that sometimes the only way to save the whole is to cut away the part that is already gone. You can't negotiate with a split end. You can't convince it to become whole again. You just have to make a clean, sharp cut and let new, healthy growth take its place. For years, I had been applying conditioning treatments to our marriage, hoping to nurse it back to health, refusing to see that the damage wasn't on the surface. It was structural. The breakage was happening at the root. The moment the shears were finally in my hand, metaphorically speaking, came on a Tuesday. It was the end of the month, a time that always carried a low-grade hum of anxiety in our house. My finances were solid. The salon was doing better than ever. His were aspirational. Leon was a freelance graphic designer, a profession that afforded him creative freedom but suffered from inconsistent cash flow. I'd long since become the buffer for those inconsistencies. That night, the notice for his co-working space rent, a full week overdue, was sitting on the kitchen island. He'd left it there, a silent paper request. It was the second time in 6 months. I waited until he was done with a client call, his voice shifting from the smooth, confident professional to the relaxed husband. He walked into the kitchen, reaching for a beer from the fridge. "Hey," I said, my voice even. I slid the paper towards him. "We need to talk about this." He glanced at it, then at me, his shoulders slumping in a performance of weary martyrdom. "Ro, come on, not tonight. I just landed that new brewery contract. It's gonna be fine." "It's not fine, Leon. This is the second time. We agreed after the last time that you'd build up a cushion. I can't be your cushion." My words were calm. I wasn't yelling. I had learned years ago that yelling only gave him a reason to call me dramatic. Calmness was harder for him to deflect. He sighed, leaning against the counter. He took a long swallow of his beer. "It's a temporary dip. You know how it is? It's the nature of the business. You have a steady thing, I don't. We're a team. We balance each other out." A team is when both people are pulling, I said, the words coming out quieter than I intended. This feels like I'm pulling and you're riding. A flicker of something hard crossed his face. He hated when I questioned the narrative of us against the world. He preferred the version where my stability was a shared resource, as communal as the electricity or the water. That's not fair, he said. I contribute. I do things around here. You live here, Leon. Doing things around here is the baseline. It's not a contribution, it's maintenance. I took a breath. I'm not covering this for you. You need to figure it out. I had said things like this before. I had drawn lines in the sand before, but they were always drawn in wet sand, and the next tide of his needs, his charm, his casual entitlement always washed them away. I would give in, for peace, for us, because I loved him. But this time felt different. My own voice sounded foreign in my ears, less like a plea and more like a statement of fact. He stared at me, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile of assessment, of a man checking the strength of a cage he believed to be unbreakable. He saw my exhaustion, my frustration, and he misread it as a temporary tantrum. He saw a boundary and interpreted it as a gesture. Then he laughed. It was a short, sharp, dismissive bark of a sound. Okay, Rochelle, he said, his tone dripping with condescension, as if speaking to a child. Okay. So what are you going to do? Leave? The question hung in the air between us. It wasn't a real question. It was a rhetorical weapon, designed to remind me of the sheer weight of our shared life, the house, the history, the 12 years. It was meant to make me feel foolish, to expose the absurdity of my own defiance. He expected me to falter, to look away, to sigh, and eventually concede, as I always did. I didn't. I just looked at him. I looked at the man I had loved since I was 24, the man whose dreams I had funded and whose moods I had managed, and I saw him with a terrifying, sudden clarity. He wasn't seeing me. He was seeing a utility, a system that had always worked and that he couldn't imagine ever shutting down. The laughter wasn't about me leaving. It was about the impossibility of it in his mind. My departure was so far outside his realm of conceived reality that it was laughable. And in that moment, something inside me went perfectly, frighteningly still. The frantic hamster wheel of my anxiety, my hope, my constant effort just stopped. It wasn't a snap. It was a quiet click, the sound of a lock disengaging. He was still smiling, waiting for my surrender. I didn't say a word. I just turned, walked out of the kitchen, and went upstairs. He probably thought I was going to sulk. He had no idea I was going to my office to Google Memphis moving companies, full-service packing. The question wasn't, what are you gonna do, anymore. The question was, when? The archaeology of our disrespect began long before that night. It was a slow, patient erosion, so gradual that I hadn't noticed the cliffs of my own identity crumbling into the sea of his needs. It started with the salon. When I first decided to open Curl and Thrive, Leon was my biggest cheerleader. He helped me scout locations. He designed my first logo. He held my hand when I signed the lease and the loan papers, my name the only one on them. In those early days, his support felt like a partnership. I was the talent. He was the brand guy. We were a team. The first hairline crack appeared during the renovations. I had secured a modest business loan, every dollar of it earmarked with the precision of a woman who had bet her entire life savings on herself. I had a budget for flooring, for custom-built styling stations, for the high-end wash basins I knew would make clients feel pampered. One evening, Leon came by the dusty, unfinished space with a catalog for high-end audio equipment. "Babe, check this out," he said, his eyes bright with an enthusiasm I mistook for shared vision. "We could put surround sound in here. Imagine the vibe. We could play some classic Stax, some Al Green. It would be an experience." "Leon, that's beautiful, but it's not in the budget. I need that money for, chairs, for people to sit in." He waved a dismissive hand. "You can get cheaper chairs. But the vibe, Ro, that's what people remember. That's what makes them come back." He framed it as a business decision, an investment in the brand he'd helped create. He was so convincing, so passionate. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe his excitement was for the salon, for us. So I reallocated. I found slightly less expensive chairs. I bought the sound system. He spent a weekend installing it, meticulously placing speakers for optimal acoustics. And for the first week we were open, the music was, admittedly, glorious. But then his friends started dropping by the salon in the late afternoons. They'd hang out in the waiting area, Leon playing DJ, turning the music up, transforming my professional space into his personal lounge. Clients would exchange awkward glances. My stylists would look at me, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and pity. I was the boss, but I couldn't control the owner's husband. The sound system wasn't for the clients. It was for him. It was the first time I paid for something for the business that was really just for Leon. It would not be the last. His name wasn't on the business, but he began to act like a silent partner, one who reaped the benefits without sharing any of the risk. My salon, the physical manifestation of my sweat and skill, slowly became his resource center. The most corrosive form of this was his co-opting of my time and my staff, or more accurately, me, as his unpaid administrative assistant. I remember one frantic Friday afternoon at Curl and Thrive. Every chair was full. The air was a symphony of blow dryers, snipping scissors, and happy chatter. The phone was ringing, my receptionist was juggling appointments, and I was deep in concentration, executing a complicated color correction that required my full attention. My phone buzzed in my pocket, insistent. It was Leon. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Worried it was an emergency, I excused myself, peeling off my gloves. "What is it, Leon? I'm with a client." "Hey, babe, sorry," he said, his voice rushed. "Listen, I need a huge favor. You know that guy from the tech startup, David? He's being a complete nightmare. He keeps changing his mind on the logo proofs, and now he's threatening to pull the project." "Okay, that sounds stressful. What do you want me to do?" "Well, he's a numbers guy, super analytical. I'm too emotional right now. I'm going to lose it on him. But you're so good with people. You're calm. You're logical. Could you just call him for me? Smooth it over? Just explain the design process, manage his expectations. You know the language." I stood in the small break room, the smell of bleach and coffee thick in the air. I could hear a client laughing in the main room. I had a woman with a head full of foils waiting for me. I had payroll to process. I had my own business to run. "Leon," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I can't be your client manager. I have my own clients." I know. Just this once. Please, Ro. This contract is huge. If I land this, it's good for us. Think of it as an investment in us." There it was again. Us. That magical word that turned my labor into a shared marital asset. The phrase that made any refusal on my part seem selfish, as if I were hoarding my talents. I was exhausted. It was easier to give in than to have the fight. The 20-minute phone call to his client would be less draining than the 2-hour argument with my husband that night. So I did it. I took a deep breath, pasted on my professional customer service smile that he couldn't even see, and called David. I was calm. I was logical. I smoothed it over. I saved the contract. Leon was ecstatic. "You're a lifesaver. See, we're a killer team." But just this once became a new category of my responsibilities. I became the person who chased his invoices. I was the one who sent polite follow-up emails when his clients went dark. I was the one who talked him down from creative crises and proofread his proposals. I was the chief operating officer of his freelance career, a position with no title, no salary, and no recognition. My skills, honed over a decade of entrepreneurship, were being siphoned off to prop up his business, while he treated it like I was just naturally good with people. He never saw it as work. He saw it as a character trait he was entitled to use. The financial erosion was more direct, less subtle. It happened in two distinct waves, like a 1-2 punch that left me breathless. The first time he couldn't make rent on his trendy little co-working space downtown, it was presented as a minor hiccup, an anomaly. He brought it up over dinner, casually, between bites of a gumbo I had spent hours making. "So, funny story," he began, and my stomach immediately tightened. His funny stories were often precursors to a problem he needed me to solve. "My biggest client is late on their net 30 payment, like super late, so I'm going to be a little short on the first." He watched me, gauging my reaction. I kept my face neutral, slowly chewing. "How short?" "Just for the office rent. I'll have it in a week, tops. Can you spot me? I'll transfer it right back to you the second the invoice clears." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that his business's cash flow was his responsibility. But then I imagined the alternative. The fight. The accusations of me not being supportive. The heavy, wounded silence that would fill our home for days. It felt like a choice between two poisons, and I chose the one that seemed quicker, less painful in the moment. "Okay, Leon, this one time." "You're the best," he said, his relief palpable. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Seriously, I don't know what I'd do without you." The words were meant to be a comfort, but they landed like a stone in my gut. "I don't know what I'd do without you" wasn't a declaration of love. It was a statement of dependency. He didn't know what he'd do without me because he'd never had to. I had never let him. The money was transferred the next morning. I never saw it again. He never mentioned it, and I, coward that I was, never asked. The second time was 4 months later. It wasn't casual. This time, there was a story of betrayal attached, a client who had backed out of a major project at the last minute. He was genuinely distraught, pacing the living room, running his hands through his hair. "It's all gone, Ro. The whole quarter's projected income. Gone." I listened. I made him tea. I let him vent his frustration. I was a good wife. And when he finally collapsed onto the sofa, drained and defeated, he looked at me with panicked eyes. "I can't even cover the office rent," he whispered. "I'm going to lose the space." This time, he didn't ask. He stated it as a shared catastrophe. The language had shifted subtly. It wasn't my problem anymore. It was our problem. "We're in a real hole here," he said, his voice thick with self-pity. And I, the ever-reliable shovel, dug us out. I paid the rent directly to the management company. I didn't even tell him I'd done it for 2 days. He just assumed it had been handled, a problem that had magically resolved itself. When he finally realized it, his gratitude was fleeting, quickly replaced by the stress of finding new work. My contribution was immediately absorbed into the background, becoming part of the invisible infrastructure that held his life together. It was no longer a favor. It was a function. I wasn't his partner. I was his emergency fund. And the worst part was, I had let it happen. Each time I said yes when I should have said no, I had laid another brick in the wall of my own prison. Looking back, I can see how he contaminated even the good memories. Our 5th wedding anniversary was one of them. Curl and Thrive had been open for 2 years and was finally, truly thriving. I had a wait list for new clients. I'd hired 2 more stylists. I was exhausted, but exhilarated. To celebrate, Leon booked a surprise weekend trip to a little bed and breakfast in the Mississippi countryside. It was thoughtful. It was romantic. That weekend, he was the man I first fell in love with. Attentive, charming, funny. We sat on a porch swing, drinking sweet tea, and he looked at me with such pride. He raised his glass. "To us," he said, "and to Curl and Thrive. I'm so proud of what we've built." We. The word wrapped around me like a warm blanket. In that moment, on that porch, it felt true. We had built it. His belief in me, his early support. It was all part of the foundation. I felt seen. I felt cherished. I held that memory for years as a touchstone, a reminder of the good, of the us that was worth fighting for. But after he laughed in my face in our kitchen, that memory curdled. I replayed the scene on the porch swing, but this time I saw it through new eyes. His pride wasn't for me, it was for himself. When he said we, he wasn't acknowledging my work and his support. He was claiming ownership. He genuinely believed that my success was his success, that my salon was a joint venture. The weekend trip wasn't a celebration of me, it was a victory lap for him. The memory, once a source of comfort, now felt like evidence in a long, quiet crime. The crime of my own erasure. He kept asking what I was going to do. The truth is, he had no idea what I was already doing. The weeks between his laughter and the arrival of the moving truck were the strangest of my life. On the surface, nothing changed. I still got up every morning, made coffee, went to the salon. I still came home, cooked dinner, asked about his day. I still sat on the couch next to him in the evenings, the blue light of the television flickering across our faces. But I was no longer there. I was a ghost in my own life, a polite, functioning hologram of the woman I used to be. My body was in Memphis, but my soul was somewhere else, poring over apartment listings in a neighborhood closer to my salon, calculating expenses, and building a new life in the quiet, meticulous spreadsheets of my mind. This quiet preparation was a secret act of rebellion. While he watched sports, I was on my laptop, wearing headphones, ostensibly listening to a podcast. In reality, I was comparing insurance quotes and scheduling utility transfers. He'd glance over, see me focused, and assume I was working on something for the salon. He had no idea the project I was managing was the complete and total dismantling of our shared existence. One night, he came and stood behind me, resting his chin on my shoulder, trying to peer at my screen. "What you working on, boss lady?" he asked, his voice warm and a little sleepy. My heart hammered against my ribs. On the screen was a floor plan for a 1-bedroom apartment. With a flick of my wrist, I toggled to another window, the salon's inventory spreadsheet. "Just year-end inventory planning," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "You never stop, do you?" he said, and it was meant as a compliment, a testament to my work ethic. He kissed the top of my head and wandered off to bed. I sat there for a long time, my hands trembling slightly. He was right. I never stopped. He just had no idea what I was working on. I was taking inventory of my own life. I was sectioning it off, deciding what was salvageable, what needed to be discarded, and what was essential. I bought a pack of small colored dot stickers from an office supply store, the kind teachers use, green for mine, red for his, yellow for shared items I was willing to leave behind. For 3 nights, after he was sound asleep, I walked through our home, a silent curator of my own departure. A green dot on the back of the vintage armchair I'd bought at a flea market and reupholstered myself. A red dot on the oversized television he'd insisted on buying. A green dot on my grandmother's cast iron skillet. A red dot on his collection of ridiculously expensive sneakers. The process was methodical, unemotional. It was like preparing a client for a drastic haircut. You have to section the hair cleanly, clip away the parts you're not cutting, and focus only on the line you intend to create. There is no room for sentimentality. There is only the plan. Looking at our home, sectioned by little colored dots, I didn't feel sad. I felt a strange, cold sense of peace. The chaos of our life was finally being organized. The invisible lines of ownership were being made visible. I was creating order. I was preparing for the cut, and he slept soundly through it all, wrapped in the warm, foolish certainty that I would always be there to tidy up his messes. The day the truck came was a Thursday. I'd chosen it specifically because I knew Leon had a late morning, a habit he'd developed of easing into his workdays. I was up at dawn. The air was heavy and damp. I stood by the window, watching the sky lighten from charcoal to a soft, bruised purple. I drank my coffee black. At exactly 7:30 a.m., the truck rumbled down the street. It was even bigger than I'd imagined. It parked directly in front of our house, its sheer size an act of finality. I took a deep breath, opened the front door, and walked out to meet the foreman, a burly man named Marcus with kind eyes. "Rochelle?" he asked, holding a clipboard of his own. "That's me," I said. "Let's do a quick walk through." Leon was still asleep. I led Marcus and his 2-man crew through the silent house. My voice was low and steady, a salon owner giving instructions to her team. "Okay, in this room, everything with a green sticker. Nothing with a red sticker. Anything without a sticker, leave it." I walked them through room by room. The living room, the dining room, the kitchen, my office. My instructions were precise. The movers were efficient, professional. They nodded, understanding the silent language of the colored dots. They began their work, a quiet, organized swarm of motion. The sound of tape guns and shifting furniture filled the house. I made a final pot of coffee, pouring a cup for myself and leaving the rest for them. I went into the bedroom. Leon was still a lump under the covers. I moved to my side of the closet and my dresser, which were already mostly empty. I had been smuggling clothes and personal items out to my car for a week, taking them to a small storage unit I'd rented. I took my jewelry box, my favorite books from the nightstand. I left his side untouched. The movers were working on the living room when he finally emerged, rubbing his eyes, drawn out by the noise. He saw the 2 strangers carefully wrapping the armchair, my armchair, in a thick moving blanket. He froze. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice thick with sleep and confusion. He looked at me, standing by the doorway to the kitchen, holding my coffee cup. "Ro, who are these people?" "They're movers, Leon," I said calmly. "Movers? For what? Are we getting new furniture? You didn't tell me we were getting new furniture." He still didn't get it. His mind was scrambling for a context in which my actions made sense within the framework of his world. A world in which we did things together. I just looked at him. I didn't need to explain. The evidence was all around him. The half-empty room, the men in uniforms, the growing stack of boxes by the door, and then his eyes landed on me, truly saw me. He saw the stillness in my posture. He saw the finality in my gaze. He saw the clipboard that was now sitting on the kitchen counter. And comprehension began to dawn, slowly, horribly across his face. "No," he whispered. "What is this? Rochelle, what is this?" He walked towards me, his expression shifting from confusion to panic. Just then, one of the movers carried a large, framed print past us, a piece of art I had bought on our first anniversary. On the back, a small green dot was visible. Leon's eyes followed the print. He looked back at the living room, at the empty space where the armchair used to be. He looked at the half-dismantled bookshelf. He looked back at me, and then he laughed. It wasn't the same laugh as before. This one was high-pitched, incredulous, laced with a dawning horror. It was the sound of a man watching a magic trick and suddenly realizing the illusion was real. He laughed, and as he did, the movers carried another box past him, a box I had labeled in neat black marker, "Kitchen, Essentials." That was the moment from the card, the moment of clarity. But it wasn't my clarity. It was his. I had found my clarity a month before in the echo of his first cruel laugh. This moment, watching him laugh in disbelief while the architecture of his comfortable life was being carried out the front door, was simply the confirmation. It was the result, the answer. His laughter didn't hurt me this time. It was just noise, the last gasp of a reality that had already expired. He stopped laughing, his face crumpled. You're leaving," he said. The words a discovery, not an accusation. "Yes," I said. I stayed for another hour, directing the quiet, methodical erasure of my presence from that house. I moved with a strange, detached calm, as if I were managing a salon relocation. Leon just stood there, a ghost in his own home, watching as the spaces I occupied became voids. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He was in shock, paralyzed by the sheer, undeniable logistics of it all. When the last box was loaded, Marcus, the foreman, came to me with the inventory sheet. It was a long, itemized list of every single thing that was now on the truck. My life, tallied on a carbon copy form. "Just need your signature here at the bottom, ma'am," he said gently. I took the pen. I saw Leon watching me from the doorway. His face was pale. He looked lost. I signed my name, Rochelle Thomas, on the line. The stroke of the pen felt like the most definitive thing I had ever done. I handed the clipboard back to Marcus. I didn't look at Leon again. I picked up my purse and my keys, walked out the front door, and climbed into the passenger's seat of the moving truck's cab. "You riding with us to the new place?" Marcus asked, surprised. "Yes," I said. "I am." As the truck pulled away from the curb, I allowed myself one last look back at the house I had made a home. Leon was standing on the porch, a small diminished figure, watching the massive truck carry away his wife and everything she owned. He didn't wave. He didn't run after us. He just stood there as we turned the corner, his world suddenly, irrevocably, half empty. And for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't worried about how he would fill it. The silence began the moment the truck's engine became the dominant sound. It was an audible, expansive silence, a presence all its own. My phone, which I had placed on the dashboard, remained dark. For the first 10 minutes, the lack of a call, of a text, was its own kind of message. He was still processing. Then it began. The screen lit up with his name. I watched it glow, then go dark. A moment later, it glowed again, and again. The calls came one after another, frantic, desperate beats against the door of my new silence. I let them all go to voicemail. Then the text started. "Where are you going?" Rochelle, pick up the phone. This is a joke, right? This isn't funny. What is happening? The messages were a real-time graph of his confusion turning to panic. I read them with a clinical detachment. It felt like watching a storm from behind thick, soundproof glass. I could see the lightning, but I couldn't feel the thunder. We arrived at my new apartment, a bright, airy one-bedroom in a restored building just a few blocks from Curl and Thrive. The movers began the process in reverse, filling the empty spaces with the familiar shapes of my life. My armchair in the new living room, my books on the new shelves, my grandmother's skillet on the new stove. My phone continued its frantic light show. The tone of the texts shifted from confusion to anger. "You're insane. You know that? Completely crazy. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? You are the most dramatic, manipulative person I have ever known." The words that used to wound me now seemed pathetic. Calling me dramatic while I was executing a meticulously planned logistical operation was ironic, to say the least. The only drama was his, echoing in the digital void I had created. I sent my one and only text of the day. It was to my sister. "It's done. I'm out." Her reply came back in less than 30 seconds. "Thank God. I'll bring wine and pizza at 7. By late afternoon, the apartment was arranged. The movers were gone. I was alone, surrounded by my things. They looked different here. They looked like mine. The air was quiet, filled only with the hum of a new refrigerator and the distant sound of the city. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail. I listened to it on speaker. It was Leon, his voice laced with a fury that was thin, brittle. "You're throwing away 12 years, Rochelle. 12 years! You think you can just pack it up in boxes and throw it away?" I looked at the boxes, now empty and flattened, stacked neatly by the door for recycling. I thought about his words, and I realized he was wrong. I wasn't throwing anything away. I was curating. I was keeping the things that mattered. That evening, my sister and I ate pizza sitting on the floor of my new living room. We didn't talk much about Leon. We talked about the salon, about a new deep conditioning treatment I wanted to try, about a terrible movie she had seen. It was normal. And the normality of it was revolutionary. The calls stopped around 10 p.m. I figured he had exhausted himself, or maybe moved on to the next stage, recruiting allies. I imagined him calling his mother, his friends, crafting a narrative of the crazy, impulsive wife who had abandoned him without warning. Let him. The truth was in the inventory sheet. It was in the colored dots. It was in the silence. The next day, I finally answered. The call came while I was at the salon, prepping for my first client. I saw his name and, on an impulse, I stepped into my office and hit accept. His voice was different. The anger was gone. The panic was gone. It was replaced by a hollow, ragged exhaustion. "Ro?" "I'm here, Leon." He was quiet for a moment. I could hear his breathing. "I walked through the house this morning," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I kept opening cupboards, looking for the coffee mugs, and they're just gone. I didn't say anything. I let the silence speak. The whole place is so quiet, he continued. I didn't realize how much noise your stuff made, just being there. He was talking about the silence of objects, but I knew he meant the silence of my labor, of my presence, of the constant, low-level energy I had expended to make that house a home. He took a shaky breath, and then he said it. The most honest thing he had said to me in years. "You planned this," he said, a note of awe in his broken voice. "All those nights on your computer, the stickers, you planned this all out, like I wasn't even part of it." The accusation was breathtaking in its lack of self-awareness. He was lamenting his exclusion from the planning of his own consequence. He saw my secret preparations not as a response to his behavior, but as a betrayal of his presumed role at the center of my universe. This was my moment for a mic drop line. I could have been cruel. I could have been cutting. But standing there, in my office, in the heart of the business I had built, I didn't feel cruel. I just felt clear. I took a breath and chose my words with the care of a surgeon. "You weren't part of the work, Leon," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You weren't part of the solution, so you couldn't be part of the decision." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I heard him swallow hard. He didn't have a response. For the first time, he had no argument, no deflection, no accusation. I had not given him an emotional outburst to react to. I had given him a simple, devastating truth. I had given him the receipt. "I have to go, Leon," I said softly. "My client is here." And I hung up. The weeks that followed were defined by a profound and expanding quiet. My mornings, once a rushed scramble to get myself ready while also making sure Leon was up and his things were in order, became slow, luxurious affairs. I would wake with the sun, make a single cup of excellent coffee, and sit by the large window in my new living room, watching Memphis wake up. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of peace. My life, which had been stretched thin to cover the surface area of two people, now contracted back to its original, more potent form. All the energy I had been pouring into managing Leon's career, his emotions, his finances, came rushing back to me. It was an overwhelming surplus. I funneled it where it belonged, into Curl and Thrive. With the money I was no longer siphoning off to cover his rent or fund his whims, I finally made the upgrades I had dreamed of for years. I replaced the last of the budget chairs with plush, top-of-the-line models. I invested in a state-of-the-art air purification system that made the salon smell perpetually clean and fresh. And with the space and financial freedom, I decided to expand. The small office next door to my salon became available, and without having to consult anyone, without having to justify the expense or manage a partner's anxieties, I signed the lease. I knocked down the wall. The expansion wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. I was literally making more space for myself. I needed to hire another stylist to fill the new station. I interviewed a dozen candidates. I wasn't just looking for skill, I was looking for character. I hired a young woman named Keisha, fresh out of cosmetology school, her talent raw, but her spirit bright and respectful. She called me Ms. Rochelle. She listened when I gave her advice. She showed up early. She respected my space. Working with her, mentoring her, felt like a healing act. I was building something healthy, a professional environment based on mutual respect, the kind I had failed to demand in my own home. My salon became my sanctuary, a place where my rules, my aesthetic, and my values were the law of the land. The business didn't just survive after I left Leon, it flourished. It turned out I wasn't just the engine, I was also the fuel. I saw him about 6 months after I left. I was walking back to the salon after a quick lunch, holding a salad and an iced tea. He was on the other side of the street, waiting for the light to change. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked ordinary. The larger-than-life charisma he projected, the confidence that had once captivated me, was gone. Or maybe it had only ever existed in my gaze. Without my constant admiration to reflect it back at him, he was just a man. A man who looked tired. He saw me. His eyes widened slightly. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to cross the street, that we were going to have a scene right there on the sidewalk. But he just stood there. The light changed. The walk sign flashed. He didn't move. I gave a small, tight nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not invitation, and I kept walking. I didn't look back. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I didn't even feel sadness. I felt nothing. It was the most peaceful I had ever felt in his presence. He was just a person on the other side of the street. The gravitational pull he'd had on my life for 12 years was gone. I was finally, completely in my own orbit. The final encounter, if you can call it that, came a month later. He showed up at the salon. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was cashing out the register. Keisha had already left for the day. He stood in the open doorway, hesitant, as if he needed permission to enter a space he used to treat as his own clubhouse. "Hey, Rochelle," he said. "Leon?" I didn't stop counting the bills. My hands were steady. "The place looks different," he said, looking at the new station, the new chairs. "Bigger." "It is." He shuffled his feet. "Listen, I just wanted to say, I get it now." I stopped counting and looked at him. Get what? Why you did it. How you did it. All of it. He gestured vaguely around the salon. "This place. It was always yours. I was just visiting." It was the closest he would ever get to an apology, an admission of his own trespass. "Yes," I said. "It was always mine." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a correction to a 12-year-old error in his thinking. He nodded, as if my simple agreement was the verdict he had been waiting for. "Well," he said, stuffing his hands in his pockets, "I guess you're doing better." I thought for a moment. Better was a comparative. Better than him? Better than before? It was the wrong word. "I'm doing my own," I said. It was the truest thing I could say. Not better, not worse. Just mine. My life, my business, my choices, my quiet mornings. All of it, finally and completely, my own. He nodded again, a sad small smile on his face. He turned and walked away, the little bell on the door chiming softly behind him. I finished counting the money, locked the door, and turned off the lights. I used to think love was about endurance. I thought it was about how much you could carry for another person, how much you could withstand. I saw it as a measure of capacity, and I was proud of how much I could hold. For years, I carried the weight of Leon's dreams and his disappointments, his finances, and his feelings. I thought that by making his load lighter, I was showing my love. I thought my strength was the foundation of our partnership. But a foundation that only one person is building is not a foundation at all. It's a shelf. And a shelf can only bear so much weight before it collapses. Love isn't about endurance. That's a job description for a pack mule. Love is about reciprocity. It's about two people building a structure together, a structure with clear lines, strong supports, and mutual respect for the load each person is carrying. My marriage didn't fail because the love ran out. It failed because the structure was unsound from the beginning. I was so busy holding up the walls that I never stopped to notice I was the only one doing the work. Leaving wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of preservation. It was the moment I finally put down the weight that was breaking me and decided to build something for myself, on my own terms, a life with a solid foundation, a business with room to grow, and a quiet space where the only person I have to take care of is the one who was doing all the work in the first place. My hands, which once managed his life, are now busy shaping my own. And the work is a joy. The work is a peace. I finally learned to be my own foundation. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.